Yeah, he told. Because he is still.
Jack Fox.
Oh my God. Yeah, no. My kids are so. Yes, yeah, that's
I don't know.
Yeah, I know. I know, and I was because right
Yeah.
noticing and encountering family.
Oh, yes.
Strange.
Oh, yeah. I was gonna get. So, oh,
They're on service. Especially one.
and then all of that. Oh, yeah. You don't have it in here. Or like a different. I think you guys. Yeah. I don't know if you're doing this, but.
When people Robert was really fine. At the beginning, yeah.
Yeah.
So you don't I did. Yeah. No, I know. Yes. I come to everyone with pleasure. Yeah.
And then they.
Yeah. And it's part of the parts.
Yeah, which is exactly kind of where I'm at. It's like,
Yeah, you don't know what.
I really want to. You wouldn't think I don't think I really want that. Like, maybe not. I'm not assuming like this is.
No, I think this is the cool start.
I really.
But
yeah. I'm just.
I have gone there. Having a reading. Oh, yeah.
Yes, yeah,
No.
So.
I'm very.
Yeah. No.
Oh, that. I like to do some calls. Oh,
And it's still there. Still there. That's just historic and you know, we haven't saved it just yet, but it is getting more.
I just, it's busy on the phone. Not impressed. Yes. Oh, really? I didn't know. Just because it's someone's really right now. I know.
I love it. It's like.
I don't know. I'm also excited about it. I know. No, I literally expected green words to answer. I was like, I'm done. And I actually done. Yeah. I was like, am I for real? Can you make sure? Yeah, but I guess,
Thanks.
I guess that's it.
Like, you know what I mean? Well, when.
Yeah.
It was on teachers.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
It's amazing.
We got so much jobs.
I think everyone wants to.
Yeah.
It's actually like.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it was going on.
I'm like, you
Yeah.
actually don't look like right. You
I
look
did.
professional. Actually look like-
No, I just never.
I did have I'll tell you.
So.
Yeah, you buy the domain for so much, but you have to have a subscription in order to do that. So they got like $2. Yeah, that's the first thing I hear.
No.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I liked using it, it's very kind of like teacher friendly, kind of customize a lot of stuff, but.
If you're in this book called Bus, it's a good short story collection.
Yeah, oh, sure.
It's working out. So. I mean, it, I have,
I need to sit down.
yeah, I mean, they're class pieces, so. And. Honestly, yeah, so I'm not like shopping around.
Yeah.
Oh, like it's just like they're just individuals. But yeah, are you like? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the possible reduction is. Oh, right. That's just. You know, teaching and I can imagine. I mean, just like submitting things, it's just annoying enough on its own, but like, very. Word. Right. And I have like cast of like that, you know, like kind of sprinkled pieces wherever. But yeah, it was so numbers. You like writing it? I'm sure. I haven't read any. I just remember anything. I know, but I'm not that happens. And I'm dealing with high school. That's like.
High school students are more. Here's the line. College. People,
Yeah.
Yeah, they that's it. So, you can call it.
Everyone gets Harvard, everyone else wants too much money.
Yeah, I can tell. They're like, every 9 weeks. There's. I don't think enough. So I didn't send it to the movie so that they aren't going to. You're right.
We're serving.
There was in the fiction.
Yeah, I'm also kind of like on stage right
I didn't even ask her about her really experience.
So this is not to see it. It's still in there. It's so so I'm getting ready for that, but I don't know if writing yet. But it's not. Working writers. But like a few hundred flyers. Yeah, yes, it actually happens, like, I was looking to find out what exactly my signing was like. We postponed the reveal of the assignments today. And I sort of got.
Yeah, no, that's.
So, I'm really to be anything. Yeah, thanks.
I didn't think I'd seen you there.
Me too.
We're going to try to.
Yeah, it's gonna be where I walk through. Do we, is a link? We don't know.
Yeah.
Cool. Ready over there? Yeah. Are we on? Is this one set? Okay, all right, folks, we're gonna start. Please give your attention to Melanie.
1, 2, 3. How is this? Okay. So, hello and welcome everyone to the Writers Speak series here at SBU in Manhattan. Hello to our audience joining us online out there. I'm Melanie Nielsen. I'm a graduate student in the Creative Writing Lit program. Tonight, it is my pleasure to introduce poet Iain Haley Pollock. Our distinguished guest will present the second of the 4 spring 24 readings scheduled at this location. My thanks to Professor Robert Lopez for his role in making the Writers Speak series happen so beautifully. And also I thank him for the opportunity to host tonight's event and the impetus for me to spend time with Iain's work, which I have been doing for a few weeks now. And so that's been fabulous. Let's see what else. Iain will read as quickly as I can get through this stuff, so he has time. And then afterwards, he and I will have a brief conversation, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. Quickly, a few words of introduction. Our poet tonight is the author of the poetry collections Spit Back a Boy, winner of the Cave Canem Poetry Prize, selected by poet Elizabeth Alexander, published by the University of Georgia Press. And then I think the most recent book is Ghost, Like a Place, Alice James Books. His poems have appeared in many publications, including African American Review, American Academy of Poets, Poem a Day, American Poetry Review, the New York Times Magazine, and The Progressive, and many more. He is the recipient of a variety of prestigious awards and honors. He performs his work far and wide, from poetry festivals to libraries and art centers. And his professional activities include work as an educator, literary journal editor, public poetry installation curator, and he is currently the director of the MFA program at Manhattanville College in Purchase, New York. There is so much to say about his work. I hope that we get a chance to, I get a chance to, bring him some of my thoughts about his work in our conversation, but we're really here to listen to him tonight. So please join me in welcoming Iain.
Thank you, Melanie. I'm sorry that Robert forced you to dive deeply into my work. It's a tough assignment. Thank you so much for having me, Robert. I appreciate it. It's nice to be reunited. We taught together at a low-res MFA program a million years ago. And hit it off right away and have some good stories from those times. So I'm going to read from the two books that Melanie mentioned, and also some work in a forthcoming book. I have a new book coming out next year in September 25. So it's a little career retrospective, which sounds more pretentious than I mean it to. This first poem is the title is from a song that was sung by convicts in the Texas prison system in the 1960s. The title is Rattler Can't Hold Me, and Rattler would be the dog that was used to supervise and menace the men as they were hired out to work for the state. And I'll sing those lines later in the poem, and apologies for breaking those nice glass windows. Rattler can't hold me. Day levels to dusk, and they remind us of rolled down windows, night breezing through, of driving nowhere, mileposts like drifting sparks along the darkened shoulder, of R&B hooks they emptied from their lungs like the rotting sweet of old mess from a vase. We will lose them, and all our sadness will be old Arkansas, rural and misspoken, its roads smudged by the fog's blue prints, its pine board shacks daubed with mud to keep out mosquitoes and the cold. The kitchens and porches where we aren't will cease to exist. We'll miss rain in autumn, dousing the fire of the leaves, wind writhing like a water moccasin. Like convicts, we'll sing, Rattler can't hold me. Rattler can't hold me. While outside the fence, poplars, stripped by gypsy moths, stand bare. So I didn't know that this location of Stony Brook existed. So at some point I said to Robert, yeah, I'm really looking forward to coming out to the island. And he was like, you're going to have to keep looking forward to coming out to the island because you're coming to Midtown Manhattan, which is a much easier commute for me. But I do have a Long Island poem. My wife's family, many of them are buried out in Beth David Cemetery near the horse track, which is closer Long Island than Stony Brook. Beth David Cemetery, Long Island. I'm the only man standing by the open grave without a yarmulke, with dreadlocks spilling onto the lapels of my suit jacket. Next to me, Naomi stares at her grandfather's coffin. Under the distant roar of jets arcing over the sound, 3 workers speak Caribbean Spanish, hushed and rapid, and smoke while they wait to fill the grave, their backs to us and the wind. On headstones nearby, mourners have set rocks, a sign of the permanence of their loss and of the earth. And families have hedged some plots with evergreens to keep other funerals from trampling their dead. Cousin Seymour, a slight, devout man, breaks our silence. We should be the ones to bury Jack, not them. And Naomi's father takes up a shovel and steps toward his father's grave. I back away onto a gravel path, bristling to think that them is the 3 grave diggers, that them is us, dark people. But while the men and boys passing the shovels between them cast dirt onto the coffin, and the grave begins to fill with the smack and roll of dirt clods on the casket lid, while Will, a great-grandson, struggles to balance a load of soil on a shovel blade, I recognize that Seymour meant them who are not us, our family, them not fused with us by life and faith, who do not suffer now when we have cause to suffer. And as our family leaves for the reception and the days of sitting Shiva, I know that when I die, our children, our grandchildren, they will grieve for me with shovels in their hands. Will is a grown man now. It's funny how when he first heard that poem, he was maybe 12, and he asked if he was famous because he was in a poem. I was like, I wish, kid. So that was the first and last poem of Spitback a Boy. I'll also read the first poem of Ghost Like a Place. An abridged history of American violence. The boys are kicking over garbage cans and smashing car windows with heaves of glass bottles. Time in the pest house of school or remediation on a road crew has moved them to boredom with bare knuckles and stolen knives. Soon, their insecurity will concentrate on the grip of a Glock till an enemy, who a minute before was unknown and not an enemy, appears under a streetlight. The provocation will be slight, soft palms hardened to a shove. In days to come, friends of the enemy will strip bark from the few trees they know and graffiti their grief onto the trunks. And the boys, even after the votive jars have filled with rainwater and plastic rose bouquets have somehow wilted in the humidity, the boys will also mourn their killed. In their woe, they will want for a light to slow drag through them, a light like the reflection of sequin or chrome. They will not find it, and they will not find it until they are discovered face up in a dirt lot where neighbors remember a house a while back was torn down, where now bricks and teeth of glass push up like Indian bones through the soil. So my mother's family, my mother's from the southern tier of New York, so like right along the New York-Pennsylvania border. And the family settled there after this sort of famous to us ancestor who was a barber kind of cut hair until he earned his freedom and then moved from Virginia north. But most of her family is still buried there in a burial ground that was originally segregated and was for the native and Black population of the town. Indian and colored burial ground. We buried Uncle Keith in Onondaga Cemetery, the old Indian and colored graveyard where Haleys have been put in the ground since Carlos bought himself free of slavery. A crabapple had just come into flower near Keith's plot. With each breeze, a snow of petals covered the turned over soil while we told stories. I remembered playing basketball in the driveway. Keith was wall-eyed by hard living. He didn't hit a shot all afternoon. The best story came from Keith's days working at the VA hospital. One night, his friend set up a corpse to spook him when he walked into his shift at the morgue. Spook he did, back through the door, his high yellow face losing its last traces of color, and didn't come back into work till 3 hours later. After the service, I stayed in a flea bag across Route 15 from a train yard. A chain link fence curling off its posts separated a mangy lawn from a break of trees. The lights from Corning shone over the lowering, still bare branches of those trees, and picnic benches rotted on the lawn. They had the emptiness of rooms in a clapboard house where no one will live after a drifter a dozen years ago butchered a family there. I was glad in the morning when I woke up alive. I heard that there's some flash fiction happening in class. So flash fiction-ish. So I wanted to read that cousin of flash fiction, a prose poem. So I made it to the, I rarely make it to this territory of the right-hand margin. That's a scary place for me to exist, but I endeavored and I persevered. I find myself to be pretty mild-mannered and laid back, but I found when my wife was pregnant with my first child, like some weird masculine instincts sort of took over. And I'm sort of working through that in this poem. And it's relevant to something that's around here because I was almost thrown off. I was living in Philadelphia at the time that I wrote this poem. And I was almost thrown off a train, an Amtrak in between Philadelphia and Penn Station. Whatever wilderness contained there, A woman, her white curls rolled tight, has twice limped through our train car and cannot find a seat. We have passed the zoo and are cutting through North Philadelphia. She complains to the conductor. She is loud, and we are in the quiet car. The conductor asks for her ticket and inspects it. Her ticket is for this train, not our original train broken down in the station. If you have a ticket for the Keystone, he says, stand up and make room for Vermonter passengers. He says we were told this before we boarded. We were not. Naomi and I could not sit next to each other. She is 4 rows in front of me and across the aisle. She has unpacked her lunch. The conductor is standing over her and sees her ticket. He tells Naomi to stand. I stand and say, I'll give her my seat. I do not act out of kindness for the limping woman. That doesn't matter, he says. All Keystone passengers must give up their seats. He is standing over Naomi. She is gathering her lunch and slow to rise. He insists she leave the seat. We are in the quiet car. The conductor tugs at her elbow and she drops her sandwich. I step toward him and explain that she is pregnant. That doesn't matter, he says. She has the wrong ticket. You were told before you boarded. I say, no, we weren't. Other passengers from the broken down train mumble in agreement. My voice is rising when I say again, she is pregnant. I do not tell him early on, first week of the second trimester. Probably she could make the trip to New York on her feet. She is pregnant, I say. Am I acting to protect her? She is carrying a child. She is not standing, I say. We are in the quiet car. Everyone is staring at me. My jaw clenches. The conductor is a small man. I am not a small man. Naomi is not standing. She is pregnant. I am standing, close to the conductor, over the conductor. My jaw clenches. I'll throw you off at Trenton, he says. Fine with me, I say, but she is pregnant. She is not standing. He says, I'm throwing you off at Trenton. Great, I say, but if I'm getting thrown off, you're getting thrown off, and everybody else is getting thrown off, except her, I say, because she's pregnant and she's not standing. This is not rational. Am I acting to protect her? We are in the quiet car. My jaw clenches. Naomi is looking up at me. I have seen this look before when I have yelled, like a skittish dog. Am I acting to protect her? She is pregnant. She is carrying a child. The conductor is a small man. He is no longer threatening me with Trenton. He is making a semantic argument. You can say she's pregnant, he says, but you can't say that she's not standing. I laugh. I am winning. No, I say, I'm saying she's pregnant and she's not standing. We are in the quiet car. People are staring at me. I'm staring at the conductor. The breath moves fast through the knot in his throat. My jaw clenches. He is a small man. I am winning. He shakes his head. He turns and sidles down the aisle. I have won. When he comes back, he will not look at me. I have won. Naomi is sitting. We are in the quiet car. She is pregnant early on. Was I acting to protect her? She is carrying a child. I have won. And then the kid arrived. When we lived in Philly, my son went to a daycare at a synagogue that had let these boxwoods that are normally hedges that are yay high, like really grow. They were the tallest boxwoods I've ever seen. They were probably 7 or 8 feet tall. And when you pick the kids up, they would always want to run and like hang in the boxwood trees. And this poem was actually started because like I think this happens, like you become your parents, and I am particularly becoming my father. There was this like string of readings, one of which was in Syracuse, um, where he would show up and we would be dressed exactly the same. We would have like one time at the Syracuse reading, we had sweaters with elbow patches, and we were wearing the same LL Bean boots, glasses, beard. It was like really uncanny. And yeah, it just got me thinking like the ways in which, particularly being a father, has brought me closer um, to my dad and to acting like my father than I would have imagined when I was a child. Boxwood. The synthesized death rattle of soul music played on the radio when my father drove us to the school where he taught and I waited to be lined up and let outdoors. At day's end, I was dismissed before he finished with his students. I'd often gather a group of friends and sneak to spy on him. Through a grated cellar window, we watched him in his basement classroom, his hands white with chalk dust, or slapping a wooden pointer against a map we imagined charted the position of enemy guns, but depicted a world we'd see redrawn within a decade. After we exhausted our espionage, we teetered in the sprawling, low-slung branches of a yew and crushed clear fluid from its red fruit. A row of these evergreens, trimmed square and waist high, hemmed the walk into the nursery at our synagogue. This afternoon, my day of teaching done, when I arrive to pick up my son, he'll want to play on the lawn before I drive him home. He'll find palmfuls of acorns and throw them into the road to see tires, mash them to pulp. Or he'll find other boys, and they'll dash with the buckling grace of fawns under two old boxwoods, pruned to small climbing trees. They'll clamber there and hang, and despite all cautions, all scolds, they'll fall and fall and fall. All right, I want to end with two new poems. Two of the earlier poems were in cemeteries. It's a bad habit of mine. And so I have been in the newer collection, which isn't all like sunshine and roses. It was really written in the shadow of George Floyd's murder and of COVID. But I was sort of aware that I did want to like push towards joy a little bit without being sort of oblivious to the things in our world that can be difficult. So I'll try and read you with some hope in the world, which I think we all sorely need now. This first one was in the Southampton Review. So thanks to the Stony Brook program and folks who work on that magazine. Frequency and amplitude, the child sing. I have known this volume in my life. Sorry, I should back up and introduce this. I love I don't like solemn public events. I like really celebratory public events. So if I'm going to a graduation, I want it to be rowdy, but not everywhere where I've worked in my career has agreed with that stance. And so I just wanted to celebrate like people getting rowdy. And like I think there's certain people who will not pay attention to the rules of decorum and be rowdy nonetheless. And I always appreciate that because that happened for me at my graduation. Frequency and amplitude, the child sing. I have known this volume in my life. I am fluent in it. They heard the man when he instructed the crowd to please hold your applause until all graduates have crossed the stage. They, mothers, sisters, aunties, cousins, ignored him willfully. Their child, on top of the usual high school bullshit, homework, and hormones, dealt every day with barbed wire eyes, policing their every movement through the hallways. Should the child be here? Is the child smart enough? If smart enough, quiet and disciplined enough, humble and low enough, look you in the eye and say hello enough. Every day, the child dodged rubber erasers aimed at her silhouette. Every day, the mockery of skin, of lips and nose, of the body's contours where it rounds the hips. And a history of hair stories, box braids or locks every day pulled on as if the lead chain to a coffle. Bow your head and walk this way. Their child. They heard please hold and were loud nevertheless. Erupted, rattled the rafters, shook the white man portraits lining the wall into the auditorium. They did what all of us should do. Send up every day praise for the child. Sing the child's survival every day. Every day act a fool until the child is all grin and teeth and shaking a head in mock embarrassment that is an acknowledgement of love. An acknowledgement that whatever broken glass is set into the next wall to be scaled, when the child's name is called, there will always and every day be a loudness from the back. Joy and bulwark against ruin, joy and bulwark against wrack. All right, last one, and then I'm excited to talk to you. This has a French title because it's about dance, but I can't speak French. So another example of me being pretentious. So I'm gonna, if you know French, you will know that I'm about to botch this. But the title means the dance of spring and quarantine. Danse printemps et quarantaine. Near the end of my run, before the road turns steeply uphill toward the house, I see a girl alone on her front lawn. The day is beautiful, cloudless and cerulean, the latest in a string of beautiful days. The girl has wound her long black hair into a tight bun and wears brown plastic frame glasses, not unlike my own, and dances. If she is dancing to music, I can't hear it, but then I don't listen too intently. I want her to be dancing to music only she can hear. I imagine the virus has kept her out of a studio for months. I imagine she has danced only in her basement or to the blue glare of a computer screen, disconnected from the other dancers. Besides plie, I do not have the language of dance to describe the few moves she performs while I run past. In the last one I catch, a cubist discombobulation of limbs, she arches her back until her hands touch the ground, then throws each leg separately over her head in a movement that would, if I attempted it, break into pieces my embrittled body. Whatever I become from here, I always want to be this girl. Dancing, I suppose, yes, dancing while people are dying, not out of callow or callous indifference, but in celebration of the dead. Celebration expressed as survival, survival expressed as a claimant act of love, an act not native only to me, but practiced until it resides in me, muscle and sinew, an imperfect act that is the only one I can think to do. Dancing. Dancing until the imagined company of dancers spins and bends around me, until the music others cannot hear renders itself visible in my body. Dancing until each passerby believes again in cloudless and cerulean, again in this day and the possibility of the next. Thank you.
Hello? Does it take a minute? 1, 2, 3. So, I was gonna say, drink some water.
Yeah.
Did you?
Yeah. I'm good.
I'll bring my copies over too.
Wow.
Thank you
It's a
so
lot of
much.
annotation.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Really lovely. I think just for a second, if you don't mind, I just want to clear the air, kind of give a little space after that reading and just read something. Ian?
Yeah.
So I picked this out because reading the first poem and the last poem in this collection. And I'm going to get into that in a minute, but it was so interesting to me how it goes to are outside the structure of the book, the 7 parts. So this is for you. This is called Easter Sunday. It's by Lucille Clifton.
Mhm.
While I was in the middle of the night, I saw red stars and black stars pushed out of the sky by white ones. And I knew as sure as jungle is the father of the world, I must slide down like a great dipper of stars and lift men up.
Yeah, Lucille's such an important poet for me. She really encouraged me at this sort of pivotal time in my MFA to. She was a visitor when I was up at Syracuse, and she really encouraged me to keep writing. And also, she was the person who introduced me to Cave Canem, and I went to the fellowship. On her advice, I applied to the fellowship and was accepted to it, and then was fortunate enough to win the Cave Canem Prize. So like all praise to Miss Lucille. And her poems, of course, are incredibly important. I think all of my poems set out to accomplish, like, I either want to write sapphic fragments or I try to write poems that are as distilled as Clifton's are and then fail miserably. I really like how much feeling, or I admire how much feeling she's able to get in those compressed poems. And I also think that she has incredible range. You know, she is domestic at times and very political at other times. She can be tender and joyful and angry. I think she's one of the great American poets to my mind.
I'm excited to hear you talk about that. I wanted to, of course, ask you about important mentors or
Yeah.
but I want to just get back to a second about Lucille Clifton, because all the things you're saying about her work, they ring true for me about your work. The different, family, citizen, the world, political, love, all that. There's such an incredible range. And so I think, I was so excited reading this, and kind of went crazy. But there's so much I want to go back to. Because there is so much range. It's symphonic in here. And I think I'll just go to this first question. Maybe, hopefully it's of interest to, poets, fiction writers, nonfiction writers. So about Ghosts Like a Place, such a collection of vast, variety. It's 101 pages. It's like such a world. Can you talk about making that book just a bit? And what I mean is, like, the process of how did you determine, the 7 parts and what went into those parts? And, and I'm really even curious about why are those 2 pieces outside? It's so interesting, and they work really powerfully. So anyway, there you go.
I mean, I honestly, like, my process is I'm really trying to write the best poems that I can. I have yet to walk into a collection with a project in mind, which I think is different than other poets. So I will write for a long time and just sort of generate material and then start revising and trying to make the poems as strong as they can be. And then really, like, once I'm tired of looking at them, like, once my eyes start watering every time I go back to revise them and I feel like they're getting done, I will put them all out on the floor, put on some music and kind of move them around and try to organize them, which is one of the hardest parts of the process for me, because I think one thing that many MFA programs do is that they teach students to write individual poems really well, but there's another sort of gear in your mind that you need to use to organize a collection. And I know that some programs teach it really well. And I had mentorship as part of my thesis, but it's something I wish I had done a deeper dive into, like, more theoretically to kind of understand it. I mean, in my most recent collection, I did that process, came up with an order. Yeah. And I gave it to my friend, Andre Serpa, and he was like, this is all wrong. And he went, choo, 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 and, like, created this this great order for it, an order that my editor apparently really likes. So I'm definitely still learning about how to put together a collection. But I was looking. There are a couple different threads in the book, as you mentioned. So I was kind of looking. Yeah, I was looking to like create arcs in within those threads. I do. I would say most of my reading is like equal parts fiction and poetry. So I do, and I try to tell stories in my poems often. I think of myself as a narrative poet. So that idea of like creating an arc, creating tension, creating an intensification across the collection was important to me. So I did try to space out the different threads, so that you could see them developing over time, and you weren't getting hit with all of the fatherhood poems at the same time, all of the sort of social justice focused poems at the same time, all the love poems at the same time. My one sort of organizing principle was this, was from the epigraph, which is a line from Rilke. Even a ghost is like a place your glance bumps into with a sound. So for me, ghost for me in that is memory, place. I'm really interested in play. I moved around a lot as a kid, so I become very attached to like the environments that I'm in and try to hold on to them. And then I think one of the pleasures of poetry for me, and it's a pleasure I came to relatively late in my early stages of writing, is the sonic quality of poems, right? That's some of poetry is just the pleasure of the language itself, and how that language creates meaning on its own. So I was trying to play with all three of those, and that's why the section titles are Ghost, Place, and Sound.
Great, thank you so much. It's so interesting how, in that little quote, when I looked at it the first time after reading a lot, I thought, I hadn't even noticed that. It's terrible. I was just writing the book, and then I went back, oh my God, because that little quote, it talks about the sound and place, and it's just like so intensely important in your work.
Yeah.
And so exciting.
It's also a poem about a cat, and I had a cat
Yeah.
that would, like, as I was trying to revise, would sit, like, the cat paid no attention and to me unless I was reading or like revising a poem, and then would just come sit on the book or the piece of paper. Exactly.
Oh wow, I just want to kind of move this out so we get into other areas. I guess I'm just going to jump to this one thing. This is the poem, the long poem in this book. It's 8 pages long. I would just say sort of that classic tradition of the American long poem kind of genre thing. It's like 8 pages, and it's so different from everything else in the book.
Yeah.
I'm curious about that.
Yeah, that's
You
probably
have
the
anything to
most,
say about that last poem?
yeah, it's probably the most researched poem in the book. I wasn't consciously setting out to write a long poem. And for me, that poem is like a mythopoetic collective biography of jazz musicians. Jazz has been really important to me as an art form, sort of personally, but I think also, like, many jazz musicians are great examples of Black male artists, and they were people I looked to, particularly when I was in my 20s, as examples of how I could live my life and what an artistic life might look like. And so I sort of wanted to pay homage to them in that poem. Yeah, it's very different. I mean, it's in sections, which helped helped write a long poem. But I was really playing with, I wanted, obviously it's a jazz poem, like I wanted to play with sound. I wanted there to be a momentum. I wanted there to be something improvised about it.
Yeah.
And I wanted repetition, so certain phrases will come back again and again.
It's funny, the thing about the improvisational aspect of it, and in a lot of your work, I think really I've noticed that, but I thought it was so interesting that it's like a poem archive too. The poem can be an archive, carrying, these things, whether they're, some of the research, some of it's imagined, a
Yeah.
lot of it based on what you really found. It's a rich brew.
Yeah, I mean, I think I hear a lot of like talk in the academy about the archive recently, and I think it's because of this recognition that we are each personally an archive, right? Like we each have our own set of stories and our own knowledge that we're bringing to bear, and a lot of like in any archive, something can get buried, and I think writing for me is kind of going through my personal archive and finding the things and the stories that I think I need to tell and that will resonate with other people. And it's also adding to that archive by reading, researching, having experiences, being out there in the world.
Do we have time for a couple more questions?
Yeah, 1 or 2 more. and then
Oh,
we'll-
1 or 2, that's it. Oh. Anything particular you're dying to tell us? I have. a few.
No, I'm fascinated by your questions. You're very thoroughly prepared.
That's true.
What's your favorite question that you wrote on there? What's the one you're most proud of?
The question is, I want to try to match it.
Read it.
No, I know.
I'm going to take your questions
I know,
home with me and answer
No,
them.
so, okay, so, it's kind of, we talked about this, but what techniques do you employ to find the appropriate register and vocabulary for what you're working on? And I'm curious about things that maybe that are more difficult subjects, things where, involving lament, or rage, elegy, and, even things like when there are no words, people say, oh, there's no words to describe this. How do we have to find the words? How do you do that? It's almost like writing through pain.
Yeah.
Talking about like maybe violence, young African-American people being killed with impunity. I mean, how do you write about that kind of thing? How do you do that?
That's a hard question to answer because the only way for me to answer is that I feel called to write about it. Like something takes over and I have to write about it, and I can't. I'm double negative. I can't not write about it, right? I feel I went to a Quaker college, so there's this idea of like being filled with the inner light that moves you to speak. And I just feel moved to speak about certain things. I mean, it happened earlier today. I went to some galleries in Chelsea, and I was reflecting on a recent experience where an audience member asked me like a pretty racist white supremacist question about Phyllis Wheatley and her work. And
About Phyllis Wheatley?
I did a Phyllis Wheatley thing over the weekend. And I was just there's a Bill trailer thing at David Zwirner, and I was just like looking at his work, and just something just hit me with that experience, and I just sat there and kind of outlined I couldn't write it in full because I was in the middle of their gallery. And I had to be up here, but I was like, I have to write about this. Like I have to respond, and I'll write down I wrote down the structure. So I think in a lot of ways, like I am feeling through the initial drafts of poems really intuitively. There's something that about my life, our society, my children, my family that moves me to speak, and I will do my best to get it out. I think then revision is incredibly important, right? Going back and thinking about how the poem moves, how the poem will be received by someone other than me, how the language and the sonic qualities of the poem are working together. I mean, obviously I'm writing in free verse, but I'll scan lines, right? If the line doesn't sound right, I go back and scan it and say, oh, there's like one beat too many there. There aren't enough beats there. I'll think about line breaks and the emphasis that they're made, that the end of the line makes. So I think initially it's really intuitive. I think you have to open yourself up to language and different registers of language. I think I would say for all writers, but particularly for poets, like all language is fair game. Like all language can be poetic if you're framing it and contextualizing it right. I think those shifts in sound and diction are really important to like how effective a poem can be. So I think it's a combination of of what I feel inside, and then this knowledge, sort of theoretical knowledge that you
Yeah.
gain as a practitioner of
Yeah.
an art. You just keep working at it,
Right,
you
the
keep
practice.
reading it, right?
Yeah.
You, for every poem that works, there are poems that don't work. There's a file of poems that got cut from each book that just I couldn't make the language work, right? This is an art you will fail, right? And you have to be open to that failure because it will teach you something.
Thank you so much. I hope we'll get a chance to talk again
Yeah.
because I wanted to talk to you about the incredible importance of visual arts in your work.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
I want to talk more shop, like about technique and
Sure.
all, I hope we can do this again.
That's yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm an incredibly visual. Again, I think that's just instinctual. Like I think I'm an incredibly visual person. I sort of think of, you said symphonic, but I sort of see my work as cinematic. Like I'm often pointing people, like pointing the camera at different images and different actions. And so I think that I bet if you did a catalog of my images, like 90% of the images would be visual. Like I don't think there are many olfactory or gustatory images in my work. And so I think that naturally creates affinity for visual art. And I think some of it is that my sense that some visual art is flawed, right? And like what we see and what the artist is seeing is flawed. In Mumbo Jumbo, Ishmael Reed calls museums centers of art detention. So that always kind of that sticks with me, right? A lot of visual art there isn't access to it. Or you have to know where, like one of the galleries I was in like 5 stories up in an office building.
Exclusive spaces that are not so.
Right. And it was really strange. People were like sitting there working and the photographs were like all around. And I was like in someone's workspace, right? And if you're not comfortable with that, then you don't have access to it. So I think there are just like strange things like that. So I sometimes will like talk back to the art.
I noticed that. I really like that.
Yeah. Because I kind of want to bring art out of those spaces, right? And like bring it out into the street and kind of put it. I think that's a trend in the Black poetic tradition, is this tension between high culture and low culture that you see really clearly in like Langston Hughes, for example. Excuse me. So I have some desire to do that when I'm looking at visual art, but yeah, I find the possibilities of interpretation of art bracing, right? And I think in the way that we as writers need the reader to complete the circle, I think reading is a creative act. I think looking at a painting and responding to it is a creative act. All right, Melanie set a high bar. You'll have to ask some questions now.
Okay.
It's gonna be going to whoever's waiting.
Hello, I'm Allie.
Hi, Allie.
So I have two one comment and then a question, because you kind of answered the first one, but I was struck by the sound, like the melodic kind of like song. I felt like I was hearing a song, really, like it really, and just the blend of those different art forms. You spoke about visual art and the sonic quality and also the language, which could often just feel like so defining language, but then with music or jazz, you mentioned jazz, it's kind of the opposite. Like the interpretation is much broader, I think. So just the blending of that was really moving to me.
What do you mean by defining language?
I guess sometimes I could feel like with fiction or with a story or with language, like it's more specific, like it kind of paints a specific picture, so I can get kind of caught in that, but maybe poetry lends itself to something else.
Yeah. I think that is, I think what you're noticing as a function of being a narrative poet is that I want to tell a story, but I want my cake and I want to eat it too, right? Like I want to tell a story, which not every poem does, but I want there to be sonic density or like melody, to use your word, to the work as well, which not every piece of prose achieves, right? So I think you're seeing me try to combine those two factors.
Yeah. My other question was something that I noticed, which I don't know if it was intentional, but you started with more somber kind of like cemetery poems, and then you went kind of to your son being born, and then you ended on like a hopeful note.
Yeah.
And so there was kind of arc there. And I was wondering about like the inspiration, but to be more specific, if you felt an arc in your life about what inspired you, more joy or perhaps something more troubling to you, or if you feel like those things are just all combining all the time and it's whatever kind of strikes you as important.
Yeah. I mean, it's, as with many people, it's like changing minute by minute, right? Like, I think, so I said I feel called to write about things, and I think I am called to often write about more difficult things. And so I really have had to push myself to write about more joyful things, because it does not come naturally, right? Like, even in talking about, I was talking to someone about the Phyllis Wheatley thing, and they were asking how it was, and I went immediately to this difficult thing that happened. But there were many good things that happened in this event. Like, I connected with a teacher from the Yonkers School District who was like, this is great. I was reading from a recent anthology called Wheatley at 250, in which Black female poets respond to Phyllis Wheatley's work. And she was like, this is great. This is a great exercise to get my students writing. And the conversation I was an interlocutor for someone who had just written the Phyllis Wheatley biography, and we had a great rapport, right? But like, my mind immediately goes to the difficult thing that happened, like the thing that I feel like needs to be responded to. So I think more often than not, that sort of intuitive sense of me is pressing on the thing that hurts, is trying to process for me what has happened. The more I write, the more I think I write for my own survival. I think if you had asked me when I was fresh out of my MFA, I would have said, I am writing to create art, right? Like, this poetry is not therapy. I just don't know that I would be in this world if I didn't keep writing, because it's my way of mediating the world. The poems that don't make it and see the light of day, I think that mediation isn't helpful or useful to other people. Or won't make sense to other people. So I do have, like, I try to consider audience, right, as I write, but I do think that what I'm writing is a function of what I need to write for myself and my survival. I'm not sure I answered your question.
You totally did.
Okay,
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Julia, and I kind of wanted to ask you like your approach on writing love. I feel like as writers, we're sort of like averse to like making it like saccharine, but I've seen like many shades of love through your pieces, like the train car piece, the quiet car piece of like there's love, but there's also like maybe like power play going on here. I'm thinking of like a piece, I think it's called like Brewery Town.
Yeah.
Of like this narrator who's observing these two people on a stoop after some like vicious lovemaking. But the love is described as like the terms of their love, but it's like very physical and like visceral. So I was just sort of curious of how to like approach writing love that kind of captures those shades.
Yeah, great question, Julia. I think that with love and even when I'm writing, so I think in my new work, it didn't quite come out in the poems that I read, but in the new book, I'm really thinking about the ways in which one of my critiques of systemic racism is that it makes us complicit in systems that we know to be oppressive and that we don't actually agree with, right? That we like work against ourselves in a lot of ways. And so there's a duality to, I think when I write about a subject, I want there to be a duality, right? You can be speaking out against something, but also contributing to it. And I think for me, that's my answer about how I try to approach love, is that love can't only be good. Like love is complicated, right? It is messy. It is as messy as we are. And I think in anything that you write about, you have to see the roundness of your subjects. I think it's really hard for us right now. I think as a society in our civil discourse, we have trouble with things that are two things at the same time, right? Something has to be one thing for us, and we're having trouble seeing things in their multiplicity. So I think in writing about love, I want it to be multiple. I want it to be difficult, but I also want it to be joyful. I mean, I do see limitations to my ability to write about love. Like I don't, like sex is part of love, and I don't have any sex poems. I feel a real limitation. I feel really limited by the male gaze and the history of the male gaze. I would be really uncomfortable writing a sex poem because of some of like the historical power plays that are involved, and what I see is like really fraught territory of male writers writing sex. Like most of the sex poems that I like most are written by women or gay men. So yeah, I think there are limitations to what I do. I might just also not have the chops to write a good sex poem. Like it might be a very personal limitation, and but I do think that, you know, I think in this day and age you have to be careful of your own positionality as you write about things, and think about where you stand. But you also just, I mean, anything you write, you have to make it fresh and new, right? I think that's some of it. I think that's the trouble with love poems, is like they've been written since time immemorial, right? And so you have to find the current or the modern angle or the thing that makes it stand out. You have to tell it slant, as is often said in MFA programs.
The poem Changing Table, Changing Table. And I just want to point out, I found like.
This is a poem in which my son pisses on his own face.
But talking about sex, sexy or whatever,
Yeah.
and then sensuous, and then the poem Violets for Your Furs.
Yeah, so
It's interesting because those are very much, there's the body, you know, the body and the sensuosity. So I don't know, we'll see what happens with your next
that
book.
poem Violet with Your Furs in particular, I feel like I'm running into I'm trying to contend with the male gaze in that poem.
Hi, I just had a quick question about, you said you don't go into your writing, or you just want to write the best poems possible, and you don't sort of think of a collection, or you don't premeditate that. So when you're doing in the revision, other than I guess the ordering, and you know, a narrative poet, is there other techniques you use or ways you approach the sort of like shaping the arc that you want to find, other than I guess the order or themes, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, there are poems I left out of the book because they didn't fit the arc, and their inclusion would have seemed haphazard to me. So I do try to identify. I think of them as threads, right? I try to look at the threads, and then organize those threads and think about how to space them out, and then think about how there's usually 3 threads, and like how they are interacting with one another. Some of it's just a function of how my brain works. I get preoccupied by things, right? And I just like let my preoccupations run, and my brain can handle about 3 preoccupations at a time, and that seems to be what ends up in the book. So I kind of, again, I feel pretty intuitive in the way that I work often. So I'm pretty content to follow my brain and where it goes. I mean, there are concrete things that I look for as I'm shaping the book. Like, I try to keep the love poems and the death poems separate from from one another. Although some love poems are death poems, right? Sometimes they are the same poem. Um, I, I I try not I try to avoid peaks and valleys of right poems that are like sort of really intense and really difficult, and then suddenly shooting up to something very joyful. Yeah.
Would anyone else like to ask a final question?
Hi, I'm just kind of, this is pretty broad, but I'm just kind of wondering what the writer's life kind of looks like for you. I mean, you seem very busy. You have you have a lot going on. We all have a lot going on, but I'm fresh out of the MFA, and it's hard to find time when there's no assigned deadlines. So I'm just kind of wondering how you get yourself to do it and keep doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I do think you have to fight for every minute that you write. I do think that one thing that happens, I have this, there was like this one glorious summer when I was teaching high school English, and I had the summer off, and I did not yet have children, and I would wake up and I would write for hours in the morning, and then have lunch and work out and like read all afternoon. And like that was the promised land, right? And like I am trying to get back to that summer. But what I've realized, if that is your ideal, I mean, that's everyone's ideal, or I don't know, that's my ideal. I am not getting back to that, right, anytime soon. So I have learned to write in like 15-minute chunks, right? You have to take what you're given. And you can't say like, I only have 15 minutes. That's not enough time. I don't know what genre I mean, this might be particular. Are you a poet or are you?
I'm a fiction writer.
Oh, okay. So maybe 15 minutes isn't enough, but like, even if you have half an hour, right, you can write a scene, you can write a bit of dialogue. If you have something, you can revise, right? There are things that you can do, even if you don't have the hours and hours and hours of time. I have never been on a residency because of work and family. Like that hasn't happened for me. So I've really had to fight for every minute, and prioritize it in a lot of ways. The real honest answer is my sleep schedule isn't great, which I don't wish on anyone, but yeah, sometimes I find myself burning the midnight oil. And I think the other thing is that you have to have a certain degree of faith that if you keep at it and you persist, like both writing and career will take off. I think one thing that's really hard about the creative life is that the path is circuitous. I have friends who are lawyers and doctors, and their path was very clear. They went to undergrad, they went to law school, they're at a firm. Now some of them are starting to hit partner. It's like A, B, C, D. Yeah, there's nothing analogous for us, right? Yeah, I mean, I worked in PR, I did an MFA, I worked for this weird Russian technology company for a couple months. I taught in private schools for 15 years, and now I'm directing an MFA program. And would I like to do that until I retire? Sure, but I don't know that life will work out that way. So I'm really prepared for what's next, and that something else will happen next. The thing I like about the MFA is I think it's a much more flexible degree than people realize, that there's so much that you can do with the degree. There's almost so much you can do. It's hard to like pare it down and figure out exactly what it is. I am not as anti AI as a lot of people are, but I've heard that a lot of the prompt writers in AI have MFAs and are like particularly are poets. So I think you sort of have to be open to the world and to possibilities. I know people also who separate work and writing, like get a 9 to 5, something that's not going to encroach too much on your life, and your job doesn't have to be your passion, right? And then your passion is writing and doing that. But yeah, I think it's a constant negotiation. Like I wish I could make you feel better, but like I am still negotiating it and getting it wrong, and sometimes email, and sometimes I make time for my writing and get it done. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, that's all. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you again for having me. Thank you, Melanie. Thank you all. Were a great audience. Thank you for all your questions. I appreciate them. I'm happy to sit and chat for a little while. Yeah, thank you.